Hello there, my name is Sixo, but more on that later, as now it's time for a brand new unboxing video, and today should be quite an exciting one as it's a new release from FansToys. Yes, this is FT-43 Dunerunner, which is their take on another classic G1 minibot, in this case, the lovely lad known as Beachcomber. So let's go ahead and get all hyped up for it, shall we? FT-43 Dunerunner is the latest release in the ever-expanding FansToys lineup, and sees the popular third-party outfit tackling the fan-favourite minibot known as Beachcomber. He's not the first unofficial attempt we've seen at this character, but as with most FT releases, this one comes with quite a bit of buzz, and it does seem as though they've done a good job with him from photos. Beachcomber is of course a peace-loving pacifist in the Autobot ranks, and puts in a memorable performance in a number of G1 Season 2 cartoon episodes, most notably in the Golden Lagoon. It looks as though FansToys have brought the character to life quite faithfully versus his animation model, but of course I'll be keen to see how he fares in hand. It will also be interesting to note how he shapes up versus the other Masterpiece-styled attempt at this character that we've seen, which was X-Transbots Arcos from a few years back. Comparisons coming up. Last thing before we begin, this review comes courtesy of TF Source, so you'll find a link to their listing in the video description. I'll be aiming to get the full gallery and review up on their blog ASAP after giving you my first impressions today. And here is Dunerunner in his box, and the first thing to notice is this rather lovely artwork on the front. FansToys typically do very nice artwork, and this is no exception, picturing him with a little bit of nature going on, as befits the character. And the other thing to notice is how small it is. I mean, it's a really tiny little box there. In fact, if I just shunt it over to the one side, like so, and bring in something like Masterpiece Prowl, you can see just how small it is. It's a really, really diddy little box. It's quite fun. Back of the box is fairly standard FansToys fare, with some nice product photography of the toy itself in various poses. It's exactly what you'd expect. Right, let's go ahead and get it open. Of course, you get a little baggie with the character card and the instructions. One thing that does have me slightly confused is the name of this guy, as everywhere you look at him online he's listed as being Dunerider, but actually the box, the instructions, all of the, anything that has his name printed with this package, it says Dunerunner. So who's to say which one it's meant to be? I don't think it really matters, and very likely I'll end up using both names throughout the rest of this review, so no need to tell me I got it wrong one way or the other. It just is what it is. And if you've ever owned a FansToys product before, then this part will come as no surprise, as the toy itself is in this little polystyrene box. And here he is! Right, so in the box you have the toy itself, which we'll take a look at in just a minute. You also get several little baggies of accessories. This is the first one, and it's got a couple of extra parts that clip onto his shins and his little gun. Another one here with another extra part, this time for the vehicle mode. And then we've got a bag of heads. Not content with just one replacement face or whatever, they've given us 3 whole extra heads. We'll check them out shortly. And so here you get the full package with FansToys Dunerunner. So you've got the toy itself, 3 spare heads, these replacement pieces, which these separated pieces here clip onto the front of his legs, onto his shins, and then this single piece is for the vehicle mode instead, as kind of an alternate look. We'll explore that shortly. You've then got the gun just here, character card, and the instructions. So not a bad package. I mean, I must admit from the character artwork, I'd got it into my head that maybe he came with some small little birds or whatever other accessories to represent his love of nature, a bit like X-Transbots did with their Arcos. But it seems that that's not a thing here. And yeah, first impressions with this guy straight out the box are that he's very solid. Feels really, really good to the touch. Typical just solid, chunky FansToys feel. Some definite die-cast going on in there as well. You can tell by just by touching it, but also by the weight. It's got that heft that FansToys collectors quite typically love, so I'm sure you'll all be happy. But yeah, he does feel really, really solid, and looks very impressive. Definitely looks like the character, but we'll explore him in a bit more detail in just a moment. Also, just notice straight away how clean he is. I mean, the whole robot mode, firstly, is proportions-wise looks fantastic. I mean, that really is, Beachcomber to a T, I think. But there's no kind of extraneous kibble going on there from what I can see. Everything looks really, really tidy. There's not much, I mean, other than stuff like the wheels, which are obviously meant to be there, as befits the character model. There's no extraneous kibble or anything like that. No vehicle mode bits and bobs kind of hanging around a bit unnecessarily. And actually the same is true even when you look at him from a side view, which, I mean, hats off to them. That is incredibly clean. Incredibly clean. Really, really very tidy at the back there. Even Arco's, which I do love from X-Transbots. I do really rate that toy. But, it had a very large kind of kibbly backpack with the kind of roll bar cage and all of that, hanging out a little bit. Whereas this is dramatically, much more simplified and great to see. And if you look at him, from a back view itself, you'll see exactly what I mean. I mean, I'm quite intrigued now by this transformation, just to see where it all goes. I did have to just peg this back section in slightly, so I did get a little sneak peek. That was not tabbed in properly straight out the box, and it was a slight effort to get just into place, but now it's there, it seems pretty secure. But yeah, really no kibble whatsoever. I'd say you can see a little bit here on the back of the legs, but that's not a complaint at all on my part, because that's still very clean. And besides which, look at everything they've achieved here. It looks fantastic. I feel like maybe we need to talk about that color scheme briefly, as it's really interesting. They've definitely gone for the bone white look for the majority of the body section there, haven't they? I don't know, even seeing it in pictures, I don't think I was quite prepared for how white it is. I mean, it is like a brilliant white on the main body just there, and it looks good. I mean, I like it, but it's definitely in kind of stark contrast to how a lot of Masterpiece toys have maybe been done up until now. And I guess they're, to my eye anyway, this is sort of slight evidence of FansToys, which they don't do very often, but it feels like maybe they're trying to move in the same direction as the official Takara Tomy Masterpiece line with that paint job there. As previously, I kind of feel like maybe they would have gone for more of an off-white or even a grey colour, again, which I keep referring to Arco's, but that was a grey, quite clearly. And this feels very, very kind of stark by comparison, but still looks good. So I feel like maybe that white is not going to be for everyone. I like it, I got to be honest, but I do feel like some people may feel that it's just a bit too on the nose. I don't know. I feel like one thing people won't be complaining about, though, is that head sculpt, which looks really, really amazing. I think they've nailed it. Honestly think they've nailed it here. FansToys have come in for some criticism on their faces over the years. This is not one that I foresee really having any debate about it whatsoever, because that is Beachcomber. It looks exactly like he does in the cartoon. It's got a lot of character to it and a lot of personality, and it just looks aesthetically really, really pleasing as well. It's cartoon accurate without being kind of too stylized or anything else. I think they've done a great job. You can also see the kind of slightly sparkly quality to the blue plastic just there as well. If anything, it probably looks more noticeable on camera, just for the way that the lens tends to pick these things up, but it is still slightly perceptible in hand as well, and it looks good. I really like it. Same goes for this lovely sparkly silver paint that's on the chest just there, which seems to be really nicely applied. And that looks really good too. And again, it's got that slightly sparkly quality to it. Some decently applied paint applications on the abdomen section there too, replicating his cartoon look nicely. They look decent, and there's some nice moulded detail there too. The wheels on the arms and the legs look really, really cool too. Tyres are actually made of rubber, so that'll be some people happy. And they've got this kind of really nice grip pattern to them as well, so that looks really, really good. And then the actual inside of the wheels, I've got this very simplified silver finish. There's really not a lot of detail in there at all, but actually it looks great. I'm really kind of impressed with how they've done that, and I think it's an elegant look. It looks really, really cool. And here you can see a bit more of that sparkly blue finish that you've got going on the main body here. And yeah, it looks really, really nice in hand. I do like the sparkle quality to it, and it probably makes a bit of a difference to it just being kind of a flat blue. So it's got the usual FansToys kind of polished feel to it. Really good quality feel in hand, so I'm sure everybody will be impressed with it. Overall then, it feels like a very solid first impression from Dunerider, and solid is probably the right word for it, as my word, he feels very, very tight right out the box, very robust joints. We'll check out the articulation in just a minute, but he feels very kind of stiff and sort of stoic, but looks great. I mean, I really, really like him so far. So yeah, let's check out some of the accessories first anyway. Right, well, first thing is you've got these silver pieces, which right out of the box I'm sure are going to confuse some people, but they're actually there to help you try and represent his vehicle mode properly. As in the cartoon, and you can see on his animation model, he's got this kind of silvery patch on his bonnet section on his buggy mode, and typically that's got an Autobot logo on it as well. That's obviously not represented here, but you can apply your own using a repro label or whatever you fancy. But yeah, so that piece is for the vehicle mode. Now it typically disappears, so that's why it's when he gets into robot mode, so that's why it's a separate piece, so you can take it off if you want. But what FansToys have done is included these two separate pieces as well, so that if you do want to leave them on, because of the way the legs split to get into his robot mode, you can put this piece on the vehicle mode instead, and then just leave it in place for when it gets to robot mode. So one of these goes onto each of his legs, and then you'd need a split Autobot logo to go on there instead, I guess. So it's completely up to you. It's quite nice that they gave you the option of whatever you want to do, so choices. So you can see the little peg holes where those pieces connect on the legs, on the front of the shins, and then you quite simply tab them in place like so. And there they are applied both on the front of the shins. Yeah, so it's a different look, certainly. It's not exactly cartoon accurate, but I guess if you find parts forming particularly offensive, as some people tend to do, then maybe it's a good option for you, because then you can just leave them on, never worry about it, and they'll always be there. Of course, if you do apply Autobot logos, then you'll have these kind of upside down, split upside down Autobot logo permanently on his legs, but yeah, it's a look. Next up, we have this very tiny but nicely detailed little handgun, which is going to pop into his hand. And of course, you just untab the fingers, like so, and then plug that gun in. It's a bit of a tight fit, but that's how it looks. Looks really, really nice, I think. It is quite a tight fit, but you know what? Once it's in, it feels very solid. And you know what? Despite being everyone's favourite Autobot pacifist, he looks really, really good with that gun in hand. I mean, yeah, it fits very, very snugly and does the business overall, it's fair to say. And finally, you get the 3 spare heads, no less than 3 of them. So what a package. The default face that you find on Dunerider is that of a kind of slightly, ever so slight sort of smirk to him, that kind of happy camper look. Typical sort of wry smile that does really befit the character very nicely. But here you get some variations on that. So going from right to left, firstly you've got this much more sort of stoic face. It looks, maybe some people prefer that because they might sort of prefer that kind of classic no-nonsense face on their robots on the shelf. It does look really, really good. Then you've got a much happier face, so big, wide-open smile. He looks really, really happy about something just there, and that does do a nice job at representing the character too. And then you've got this one, which is a little bit different, and maybe some people might not be familiar with what this is trying to represent, but it's actually from the episode, the G1 episode, The Golden Lagoon, which is a very Beachcomber-centric episode, where he discovers the Golden Lagoon, as the episode title suggests, which is this sort of fountain of gold liquid that coats him and some of the other Autobots and later the Decepticons and makes them impervious. But it's part of this sort of paradise that he discovers. Anyway, when he first goes in, he is talking to some of the local wildlife and particularly the birds that are around, which is where the bird image from the front of the box comes. And he briefly has this little look to him. It's very, very brief. It only lasts a couple of seconds on screen, but his visor kind of does this cool sort of, computerized look as he's analysing what's going on around him. And I think they've done a really nice job at representing it here. It looks ace. Now, initially, I was all set to grumble on this section, as I genuinely thought, looking at them, that the only way that you were going to be able to get the heads on and off again was by unscrewing the back, as there didn't seem to be any other way to do it. However, in the process of looking at it, I've just discovered that you can pop them off quite easily. I mean, I really like that kind of simplicity. In fact, you know how it makes me feel? Pretty happy. So yeah, I really like this smiling face. It's adorably goofy, is how I would describe it. And again, it looks really, really cool in terms of the character. I think it's good. And then there's his more serious look where he's sad because the Golden Lagoon has been destroyed. Yeah, it looks good. And then you have this kind of computerized visor look, which is really, really good. And you know what? It's a very brief clip, as I say. So it's honestly not the kind of thing that FansToys does very often. But I'm pleased they included it. It's good. So yeah, he's got a lot of different looks, which is really, really cool. Right, let's take a look at the articulation. And as I've already mentioned, the joints on this guy are super stiff. So this will be interesting. Well, firstly, whichever head you've got on there, it turns very nicely from side to side. Very, very stiff on the ball joint there. I mean, exceptionally stiff. And it can look up a little bit and not really down, but maybe like a fraction, but not much. Shoulders are on a double joint, so they can go quite far up at the sides and, of course, can move all the way around as well. So lots of articulation there. There's a very decent bicep swivel, and at the elbow, yeah, only goes to 90 degrees actually, so not too much. Now there is wrist swivel. It's very, very tight, and this hand is absolutely tiny, so it's quite hard to manipulate. And there is finger articulation as well. These are also exceptionally tight, but it's just one single molded piece for all of the fingers, given how tiny it is. It's got a bit of waist swivel going on. Again, it's very tight. Now, there's no ab crunch as such, but if you do untab just this part of the backpack like so, then you can hinge him forward just like that. I mean, it's not really an ab crunch, and it's kind of in the wrong place, as it should obviously be further down here, but maybe you can use that for posing. I don't know, it'd be interesting to see. As far as the hips go, there's a single hip flap, which is not my favourite, I have to say. Don't really like that, but it is what it is. As for the hips themselves, well, you can get roughly 90 degrees. Then at the knees, it's about 90 degrees again. Decent amount of ankle tilt just there, slight visual break in terms of how that works, but that's very common. And the feet themselves are on a back and forward joint, just like that. And overall, I'd say that he poses quite nicely. I mean, there are a couple of bits which are slightly impeded, just here and there, but for a robot of this size, I think that's a decent amount of posability, to be completely honest. And I had no trouble getting him into a kneeling stance, just like this. I guess the real trade-off is this hip skirt, which I'm just never a fan of the single piece hip skirt. Hip skirts in general are one of those that just tend to look a little bit cumbersome, as however you flare them out, they always look a little bit unnatural to my eye. But particularly when it's a single piece, as you know, even this leg which isn't bent forward, then you've still got to have this piece raised, so that's a little bit unfortunate. I mean, otherwise, I do think it's a bit of a shame that the arms don't bend more than 90 degrees, as that always allows for a bit more, fluidity when posing. But overall, he looks really, really good. I really like him. And I think he does pose very nicely and quite naturally overall. And again, he's not the largest bot by any means, so, I can forgive some of the joints not being the most flexible. But yeah, he does look good. And besides which, the overall look of this guy is enough to recall the character really, really nicely. I mean, I think if you're in the market for a Masterpiece style Beachcomber, you could certainly do a lot worse than Dunerider here. As you know, he's got the look of the character down to a T, I think, anyway. And he's a lot of fun to mess around with too. Okay, well now it's time for a few comparisons, and I'm going to try and do a few different Autobots with this one to see how he shapes up versus various different ranks. I mean, the most obvious first comparison is, of course, with the one and only Optimus Prime. This is MP-44, not the MP-10 version, but it's the same size, to give you an idea of that. And then let's bring in MP Ironhide and MP Ratchet. There we go, all represented. And I think it's really interesting to see is actually, although I keep talking about how small Dunerider or Dunerider is, he actually shapes up to be fairly sizable overall versus these guys, who are all quite large actually in this display just here. Also interesting to see, and this is kind of what I alluded to earlier when I was talking about the colour of Dunerider and this white in particular, which I think is going to cause a little bit of comment. But you can see, I think here, what FansToys are going for. I mean, it definitely, is kind of aping this white paint that Takara Tomy have gone for on MP-44, and it also sort of matches the very stark white that you get on figures like Masterpiece Ratchet, of course. It's actually, if anything, it's more of a brilliant white than MP-44, which is quite interesting to see. I always thought this was a real white, but if anything, this has got a slight hue to it. I don't know, maybe it's just the kind of red that it's mixed with, but this is much more of a brilliant white. Looks more similar to the kind of main section on Ratchet than anything. But there you go, that's the first impression of how they look together. Next we're going to bring in a couple of the Carbot lads. I mean, firstly here's Masterpiece Hound, and then Masterpiece Wheeljack, and then last but not least, one of my favourites, Masterpiece Sunstreaker. And again, you can see that actually Dunerider isn't that small really. I mean, for a mini-bot, he's not all that mini. We'll compare him to a few mini-bots in a minute, but he's not that far off Carbot height, if anything. I'd say that he's just about coming up on a little bit below their shoulders, maybe. But he looks great with them, I have to say. He looks really, really good with all three of those. Really colourful. I really like the brighter blue that they've gone with on this release. We'll compare him to Arco's in just a second, but I think the bright blue here works nicely in terms of this cartoon lineup. It's a similar thing that Takara Tomy have done with Hound, where this green is quite a sort of it's got that kind of matte, almost sort of pale quality to it, but it really works well in terms of aping the look of the animation, and I think that's what FansToys have gone for here too. Right, well, we're going to take a look at him versus some mini-bots now, and firstly we'll do some of the 1984 crew. So here's Bad Cube Brawny and Bad Cube Huff, and Bad Cube Grump. Of course, both Brawn and Huffer are going to be represented by FansToys very soon. With their, well, actually, their Brawn's already out. Then we've got X-Transbots Boost and X-Transbots Toro for Cliff Jumper. And you can see there how he scales and sizes up with all of them. So actually, Dunerider is the tallest of all of that lot. Brawny sort of comes up just not quite to head height with him, but not too far off. But yeah, Dunerider definitely outdoes all of them. So that's interesting to see. I mean, it's different interpretations of the scale chart maybe, however that works. I definitely feel like mini-bots are getting a little bit taller though, in terms of how they're represented by different third-party companies. And this is probably the greatest evidence you need of that overall. That said, I feel like some of the 1985 mini-bots were typically represented as being a bit taller anyway. I mean, let's check him out here with DX9 Powerglide. Then we have X-Transbots Cosmos. We'll have FansToys Sheridan, their Warpath, and X-Transbots Neptune, which is their Sea Spray. And there you have the 1985 mini-bots all represented in Masterpiece form, albeit by different third-party companies, which is really interesting to see. And actually, to be honest, I think in this lineup, Dunerider matches very, very well in terms of the size, very, very well. Better than Arcos, who we'll take a look at in just a moment. But I think FansToys have done a spectacular job there, and by happenstance with other third-party companies, he seems to be lining up to a decent head height, about the same as old Sea Spray and Powerglide there. And overall, this is a really strong showing from third parties in terms of the 1985 cast. These characters are all some of my favourites. Anyway, so it's nice to see them done well. I don't know, I just always had a thing about some of the 1985 cast, because it always struck me that a lot of the 1984 guys were jocks, you know, like Sideswipe and Sunstreaker and whatever else. And it was nice that in 1985 you got some real oddballs, like some non-classic hero archetypes, you know? I mean, Beachcomber himself just being a pacifist was something that you didn't see represented all too often on screen in the 1980s. So yeah, a lot of love for these characters. Okay, now we're going to do something interesting, which is compare him with two different versions of Bumblebee. So we have the MP45 and MP21 designs just there. Two different versions of that same character. And firstly, that's interesting to see in itself, because, you know, I talked about height and how they're getting a little bit taller. I've mentioned a couple of times that this new MP Bumblebee is obviously noticeably taller than the previous version. And at the time, a lot of the third-party mini-bots were modelled after this guy. You know, they were all kind of designed to fit him in terms of height and style. So, and then of course, you know, Takara Tomy went and redid him just recently, or not too long ago anyway. And, you know, say what you want about this toy, a lot of people loathe it, although I do suspect that a lot of those people have only seen pictures of him, but hey, yeah, I mean, I still have many complaints about him in hand, but whatever. It's interesting to see because he is a lot taller. And I think now that you're seeing maybe people are starting to chase this design. And it's the same thing that happened with MP10 and MP44 in that, designers from third parties are almost trying to catch up a little bit and alter their designs to fit. But you can see how Dunerider works with two different versions of that character that are just there. And the reason I think this is so interesting is that if I then bring in X-Transbots Arcos, and you know what, just for a bit of symmetry if nothing else, we also bring in the Generation 2 version of that mold, which I do love. We'll talk more about that in a minute. You can see probably what I mean in that I think Arcos quite clearly has been designed to fit MP21. And then, I don't know, with Dunerider, arguably they've updated how the sculpt would look. I mean, it's definitely got that classic FansToys look to it, but all the same, I think even with FansToys, their designs have evolved a little bit since the kind of early days. The Dinobots, things like that, they're much more simplified now in terms of design and much more cartoon accurate in many ways and kind of chasing that simplified look. So, arguably, this guy fits in better with MP45 for better or for worse. So really, I guess it kind of depends what sort of look you're going for on your shelf and what you want out of your collection. And then just taking a look at my beachcombers, it's quite interesting to see as really for me this speaks volumes about how you can get different third-party interpretations of the same character and have them look so different. And it is interesting because, sometimes it's quite clear that even though they're done by different designers, different companies, those different interpretations of the same character can end up feeling very similar. Stuff like, it's official, but, the Masterpiece Sunstreaker versus the Bad Cube effort, for example. They're the same height, they've kind of got the similar look going to them, and you almost feel like the official toy actually probably took some notes from the third party. I don't have any grounds to back that up, but that's just my feeling. Whereas here, they're completely different toys, different designs, different aesthetics, obviously different heights as well, quite clearly. So there's a lot of variation in these when choosing which might be right for you. Look, I still really like Arcos here. I really dig this toy. I will say, the QC errors with this toy are quite widely publicized. I did a review of him back in the day, whenever it was, and made mention of the fact that, various bits pop off this guy during transformation. Some of the joints are a little bit loose. He is a bit fiddly. So he's definitely not perfect by any means. But still, looks-wise, I think it's a strong look. It's just more detailed than maybe we're used to now, in terms of what people are. Well, certainly I was going to say what people are looking for from Masterpiece. That's not always true, but definitely the current iteration of Masterpiece anyway. Whereas Dunerider, has that kind of more evolved look. It's cleaner, and actually, to be honest, just feels more solid and more polished in hand. So. But equally, it does depend what you want, as the look of Arcos is still really strong, and there's a lot to be said for it. So I think it's personal preference, really. I'm going to take some time to decide which of these two I like most. Look, I still have to transform this guy first of all. So, and then it's just interesting to see the Generation 2 version of Arcos as well. As anybody that knows me will know I'm a huge Generation 2 fan. Of the original toys, but also of things like Masterpiece homages as well. And I guess it's unlikely that we'll see FansToys ever do a Generation 2 version. They seem to have stopped doing those kind of repaints and recolors, which is a real shame. I love their Generation 2 Dinobots, for example, but it feels like they've sort of turned a corner with that, and they don't do that kind of stuff anymore. So probably that'll never happen. So it may be that actually, if you want to experience both of these molds, that Generation 2 Arcos and Dunerider could be a good way to go. It's up to you. Okay, well now it's time to do the transformation, and I'm looking forward to this one. Hopefully it's not too complicated. FansToys transformations seem to vary between mind-numbingly excruciating and actually not too bad. So it'll be interesting to see where this one falls. Let's take a look. And here he is in his vehicle mode. And yeah, I have to say that wasn't too bad actually in terms of transformation. For a FansToys effort, it was relatively straightforward. I feel like it's going to be quite repeatable too, to get him back to robot mode and then back and forth. But yeah, a couple of bits where you have to push exceptionally hard, I will say, particularly in this front section, which requires quite a lot of force in areas to kind of get it just to the point where it will click together. Sort of nicely, but when you do, it tabs pretty well. Particularly this sort of front bumper section, I had to really push on the bottom and squeeze quite hard just to get it to kind of raise up enough to then fit in the front. Same is true of this back section, trying to force that down. That took a couple of attempts just to get it to kind of click in properly. To be fair, it does say in the instructions to apply a bit of pressure or words to that effect, but yeah, they certainly weren't joking. And you know, I did also find that actually I had a bit of white paint flaking just off on my hands, just a tiny bit. But it doesn't seem to have affected the final product at all. In fact, having given it a once over, the paint looks absolutely fine in vehicle mode. But yeah, I did see, and you will be able to see in the transformation bit of the video, I'm sure, that there is some noticeable flecks of white paint coming off on my fingers. But you know, as far as a finished product goes, this buggy mode looks pretty good. I mean, firstly, it's very tidy, has to be said. Surprisingly so, actually, considering how tidy the robot mode was too. And I really like the way that all of this kind of kibbly stuff that could really look a bit bad in robot mode is all nicely hidden and unfolds during the transformation. And actually, it has to be said here that it looks really good in car mode too. I mean, there's a real attempt at a sort of real-world interior, which we'll look at closely in just a minute. But overall, yeah, it looks good. It's a nice representation of this kind of vehicle mode. I mean, even the underneath is quite clean if that's a concern of yours. Let's talk about these absolutely beautiful headlight sections, which look really cool. They've got a kind of translucent blue plastic on there. They catch the light really nicely and they look great. Really dig that. Quite like this little silver section here, which the light is connected to as well. And although it looks like a sort of spring, and presumably it would be on the actual vehicle, there's no spring or any kind of mechanism involved there. It's just a sort of molded part, but it still looks really cool and, you know, quite real world as well. This part's going to annoy me though, I can tell, because for transformation it's supposed to rotate round and sit on that little nub just there, but it pops off ever so easily, particularly on this side actually. The other one's a bit better, but doesn't sort of sit very securely, so I keep pegging it back in, but I feel like that's going to be a bit annoying. The wheels are a strange one, as they ask you to pull them out slightly to extend them during transformation, but in order to do so you have to rotate them round to a particular orientation, and then they pull out quite easily like that. And again, if I just rotate it slightly, it won't pull out. Rotate it to the right place and it will. The only thing is that they don't actually lock in place. I mean, even if you do rotate them round, they just push back at any time. And there's no way that I can find anyway to actually lock them in. So maybe I've missed something, but it seems really strange. So they just kind of forever feel like they're sort of moving back and forth. What's more strange is that actually there's no need to extend them at all. I mean, they roll you know, really kind of freely without extending them, and I don't think it necessarily improves the look either, so strange choice. The back wheels don't roll as well though. I mean, they will just kind of if I manipulate them with my fingers. Obviously they do roll, but still they're quite stiff. I mean, every so often it just feels like it's catching ever so slightly. There you go. It's just caught there a little bit. So actually, yeah, they're quite so sticky on both sides. Consequently, it does feel like it doesn't roll particularly well at all, and that's mostly on account of these back wheels. I've double checked in the instructions and had a little fiddle with it, but there doesn't seem to be any way to kind of take account of that or to adjust it to make it better. So it just feels like he's sitting on the surface a little bit. These back wheels are not really helping the situation. These front wheels are a little bit awkward because they do pop off, particularly that one. So in terms of rolling, it's a bit of a non-starter. Hold up, I feel like after a bit of investigation, there's a slight update to the back wheel situation, as I did just find that there's a slight bit of movement. It almost feels it's barely perceptible, but it feels like there is a little bit of movement and a slight click there. I can just about feel it. And this is interesting because it's not mentioned in the instructions at all, but it does feel like maybe it's a purposeful thing. That said, it doesn't really help with the rolling situation at all because it still kind of sticks in place a little bit. Also, it's fair to say that it's not really sitting at a very straight angle, this wheel. It kind of looks like it's slightly, I don't know, slightly skew whiff versus the rest of the buggy mode. So yeah, it's a strange one. Nice detail on that real world kind of interior though. They've done a really good job with that. There's a little steering wheel, a kind of dashboard, and even a little attempt just in there at a gearbox as well, so that's something. I did just check out and the steering wheel doesn't move at all, but I do feel like going for metal on this section overall was a really smart choice of theirs. And I mean, not only does it look really good, but it just, you know, there's no worries about snapping anything as well. So it's good news. Same is true with this roll bar cage, of course, which, you know, if you think back to XTB Arcos, that was plastic, and that was always my biggest bugbear with that toy overall. So this being metal on this version feels much more sturdy as a result. Some nice silver paint on the back here. Yeah, I mean, look, this looks like boobs. I don't know what else to tell you. It's boobs. Or maybe not, actually. Swing it this way, and I think you got yourself a pair of eyes, a little mouth, maybe roll him in reverse, and this could be the face of the vehicle mode. Well, I say that, but actually it turns out there's a face on the front of this thing as well. I mean, how does that not look like a little frog of sorts, right? Am I the only one that is seeing that? I mean, if they do ever do this guy in G2 green, then heaven help them, because, well, it's just going to be undeniable. Ribbit, 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 ribbit. So look, it's not entirely perfect, and there's definitely a few little oddities with this vehicle mode overall, but still, I kind of dig it. I mean, I think, you know, for what a Beachcomber alt mode needs to do and needs to look like, I feel like it's a decent enough stab. Certainly, I don't have any major complaints with it. It's a shame it doesn't roll, and it does feel like maybe it could sort of fit together a little bit better in terms of things like the wheels, but hey, it does the job. Right, well, let's go ahead and take a look at that additional plate that fits on the bonnet section, shall we? So it quite simply just tabs in place and then pops up again and tabs in place and pops up again. Third time's the charm. There you go. So look, yeah, it just sort of tabs in place. I think presumably if you fiddle around with everything and get it all tabbed just so, I'm sure it'll stay quite securely. I'll keep trying. But that's how it looks anyway. And of course then if you really want to, you can go ahead and place your Autobot logo on there. And it's kind of the finishing touch, as it were, to this vehicle mode. And there it is. I mean, I had just a quick fiddle with it there. I've got it slightly more secure. It does still have a bit of propensity to pop off every so often, so that might get a little bit annoying, you never know. But yeah, it kind of completes the look, I guess, for better or for worse. You don't have to have it on if you'd prefer not to, but it is a decent solution, I guess, for placing an Autobot logo and not having that on the front of the shins. So yeah, it's a decent solution. You can actually plug his hand blaster into the vehicle mode as well, so let's take a look. I mean, the first thing you need to do is get this little cage unplugged like so, and then the gun just slots into that little tab, and then do the cage up again, and voila! And there he is with the gun all installed in vehicle mode. It looks pretty cool. Right, well, we're going to do a few vehicle mode comparisons now, so let's just move him over to one side, and then we can bring in Masterpiece Sideswipe, the Plus version anyway, Masterpiece Tracks, and the Plus version of Masterpiece Bluestreak. And yeah, I mean, obviously he's quite oversized, isn't he? That's the first thing to comment on is the size, which, yeah, I mean, it's about as real-world vehicle mode scale as you're ever going to get. We all know by now that real-world vehicle mode scale is not a thing in the Masterpiece line. If you want your car modes and jet modes and whatever else to scale up, it's not going to happen. It's all about bot mode scale, and the vehicle modes just kind of fall where they may. So some people don't mind that, like me. Other people are less keen, it's fair to say, and that's fair enough. But yeah, it's just never going to happen, sadly. And it's going to get more complicated when you start looking at stuff like combiners. So yeah, he is oversized versus the cars. But you know what? Stylistically, he looks pretty good. And I think he fits in pretty well. Well, now let's bring in something a little larger in scale. Here is FansToys Iceman. So comparing to another FansToys product, just to see. And yeah, interesting one. I mean, if you thought the cars didn't work in terms of size, then check out this, eh? Yeah, but it's good to see FansToys taking on more of these real-world alt modes all the same. I said as much recently when I was looking at Iceman, I think, and yeah, and indeed stuff like their Stunticons as well, because I feel like up until now they've done Dinobots and Insecticons and loads of stuff like that doesn't require those real-world vehicles, whereas now they're moving into territory where actually they're doing more and more of them, and it's really good to see because I do feel like they're doing a good job with it. And one final comparison for the day is with the G1 toy and a couple of variations thereof. And yeah, he's noticeably bigger, as you can see, but you know what? This little fella is still one of my favourite Transformers figures of all time. I absolutely adore him. So it is cool to see him done quite nicely in sort of Masterpiece form as well. I mean, seriously, FansToys, if ever you need inspiration for some recolours for this mould, here you go. I mean, look, I'd be over the moon if they gave us a G2 green version, especially if it came with some sort of toy head or something like that. I think that could look really, really cool. Equally, there's this guy, the red version, which is actually a KO of the original G1 Beachcomber in the middle there, but the red version was represented in a number of the catalogues, or certainly one of the catalogues at the time. It was obviously a sort of painted version behind the scenes that they stuck in one of the G1 catalogues, and has since gone on to be known as Buggy Man in fiction. But that's a whole other story, which I don't have time to tell today. Ask me another time. But still, it'd be great to see some of these recolours done by FansToys. So, final thoughts from me are that Dunerider is quite good. Quite good. Not perfect by any means. There are a couple of grumbles along the way. I do think that some elements of the transformation are not arduous and it's not complicated. It's more just the kind of fit of how it all comes together that feels a little bit not as satisfying maybe as it could. It's not a major grumble, and you know, it can be transformed quite easily. It's just really the way it kind of clicks together is not quite as satisfying as maybe some other products that I've handled recently. That's fair to say. And the little buggy mode, whilst it is cool, it does have some flaws. I mean, the fact that it doesn't roll properly, these tires, whatever's going on at the back here, this bit which keeps popping out and has done more times since, those are all little irritants, I would say. So yeah, not major grumbles, but yeah, certainly the vehicle mode feels a little bit, maybe a bit underwhelming because of those points. That said, I really like the robot mode. I think the robot mode is really something. There's little things like the hip skirt, which is just annoying, but you know, not a deal breaker by any means. And I do think that they've done a really nice job at bringing the character to life. And you know what? I'm sure for most people that will be enough. That's really the kind of key criteria, is a nice looking beachcomber to go on the shelf or to have in a display. And from that metric, you know what? It's a toot. So that's FT-43 Dunerunner. I'll put a link to TF Source's listing for this guy in the video description, and I'll be aiming to get the full review and photos up on their blog ASAP. Now, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, then please drop me a like, and if you haven't yet, don't forget to subscribe to the channel too. Thanks also to everyone who already supports me on Patreon, details of which are coming up at the end of the video in just a moment. Otherwise, that's it from me, so enjoy the rest of your day. Ribbit, 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 ribbit. TTFN.